Hi folks, here you see the USS Nimitz CVN-68 coming into Bremerton, Washington, where she is currently operating out of. And I thought in this particular episode we would talk about how the Navy takes care of these aircraft carriers during their operational lifetimes. Now, there are three types of maintenance that is associated with the carrier. First, obviously, is new construction. Next is planned incremental availability, or PIA. And third is what's referred to as RCOH, Refueling and Complex Overhaul. Now, the RCOH is particular to the nuclear aircraft carriers. The conventional carriers did not have an RCOH. Now, the reason that conventional carriers do not have an RCOH is because they're not nuclear powered. And to be frank, there are no more conventional carriers within the Navy. But anyways, we will cover more about RCOH later. Let's talk about some of the factors that govern the maintenance cycles on aircraft carriers. Now, first and foremost is deployments. Generally speaking, a ship will go on deployment, it'll return, and then for 2 to 3 months, it will be a ready carrier, meaning that in the event of an emergency, it can be deployed again. Now, once that 2 to 3 month window has come and gone, the ship generally enters one of the two different types of maintenance that we're going to talk about here shortly. And obviously, they want to maintain the condition of the carrier. So depending on its last maintenance cycle, the upcoming maintenance cycle may actually be longer. So let's dive into the first category, that being new construction. Huntington Ingalls Industry, or HII as they're known, is the largest military shipbuilder in the United States. That's where all of the nuclear-powered carriers are built back in Virginia. Generally, it takes about 6 years to build a carrier. Now, that being said, the newer Ford class, the maiden ship of the class, the USS Ford, actually took 13 years to build. And that in large part is due to it's a brand new design. They're putting a lot of new systems in there. And so it's just going to take a lot longer to build. You can expect that each follow-on Ford class carrier, that's a mouthful, will go much faster. And you know this in your own personal life. If you make something, when you go to, say, make it again, whether it's dinner or lunch, it goes a little bit faster. You know where everything is. You know what you need to do. Same thing with aircraft carriers. So you might be wondering, cost. It's $9.7 billion to build a Nimitz-class carrier. Ford actually costs $13.3 billion. So here you see the massive crane that HII uses to assemble these carriers. Carriers are designed on a computer and they are then welded and put together in modules, and then these modules are lifted by this crane onto the ship, much like you would assemble a Lego set. Now, this particular crane is 260 feet tall, it's 400 feet wide, and can lift up to 315 metric tons. This crane, along with the other facilities at HII, are why this is the only place in the U.S. where carriers are constructed. Now, let's talk about our second type of maintenance, and that is there's actually two types within the category. You have what's referred to as planned incremental availability, or PIA. This is the maintenance that I spoke about earlier, in that a ship returns from deployment, it's in ready reserve for 2 to 3 months, and then they're going to start the overhaul process. Now, PIA is generally a 6-month phase of modernization and maintenance work to ensure the ship's material condition. Now, there's another form of PIA, and that's referred to as a dry docking PIA, which includes the execution of depot level maintenance, alterations, and modifications that will update and improve the ship's military and technical capabilities. Again, a mouthful. And that's generally 18 months long, as opposed to the 6-month long version of a regular PIA. Now, when we talk about depot level maintenance and alterations and modifications to the ship, what we're talking about is they're pulling catapults out of the ship. They're pulling sometimes the screws off of the ship. You're bringing in yard workers, lots of them, to really tear down the ship, pull these systems out, replace them with new systems. We're talking about a lot of costs and a lot of work, and that's why you go from a 6-month PIA. When you go to a dry dock PIA, now you're going up to 18 months long. It's just a lot of maintenance. Let me give you an example of a docking PIA. Here you see the USS Theodore Roosevelt entering the Rich Passage on her way into Bremerton, where she was going to enter her 18-month PIA, and I believe this was in June of 2021. And so she was dry docked and started her maintenance. And then in this photo, you see she has been floated out of the dry dock, and she's then put alongside a pier where remaining upgrades are completed. So let's dive into the RCOH portion of the video. Remember, that stands for Refueling and Complex Overhaul. Now, nuke carriers enter RCOH during its midlife point, 25 years out of a 50-year operational lifespan. And there's a lot of planning that has to go into this overhaul. And, you got to order materials and plan on bringing in equipment, as well as taking equipment off the ship and shipping it to other parts of the U.S. for refurbishing. So it also involves taking the expended core out of the reactor and putting in a new core with fresh nuclear fuel. So this is like a 4-year process. It's performed at Huntington Ingalls Industries. Usually costs about $3 billion. And it represents a full 35% of the maintenance and modernization that a carrier is going to undergo during its lifetime. Let's talk about what the Navy does with an aircraft carrier once it has completed its operational service. It is commonly referred to as scrapping. And if you look here in this picture, you see several decommissioned carriers at the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. And if you're curious about that shipyard, I have another episode specifically on it that you can find on the channel. But anyways, this is where the carriers were stored after they had been decommissioned and, as the Navy says, stricken from the record. And what ended up happening is, after the ships were there for many years, the Navy sold these carriers to International Shipbreaking Limited, which is a company in Texas that essentially dismantles the ships and recycles the steel and whatever else that they can from the ships. I've even seen where they sold parts of the ship on eBay to presumably former crew of the ships. How much were they sold for? By the Navy, exactly 1 penny. Now, what's interesting is once the Navy sold the ships, they are towed they were towed out of Bremerton, and they had to go all the way around South America in order to come up back around Texas because these ships were too wide to go through the Panama Canal. Generally, it takes about 18 months to dismantle the conventional carrier. Now, there is one exception to these conventional carriers that I showed you, and that is the USS Enterprise was the first nuclear-powered carrier to be decommissioned. Now, she was decommissioned in 2017, but she still remains in Virginia, where she has been preliminarily dismantled with her reactor-related items having been removed. Now, keep in mind, when nuclear reactors are involved, you can't just sell it to a company and have them dispose of it like you did in the previous instance with the conventional carriers. So, all that being said, the Navy's currently exploring the best path by which to finish dismantling Enterprise, because even though they've dealt with the initial reactor portion, there's still other reactor-related areas of the ship that will have to be dismantled, and then you can move forward with dismantling the rest of the ship.